One morning, I walk into the office, a job I had poured 5 years of my life into, and I was fired. Not for incompetence, not for poor performance. I was fired because I had made myself too expensive. And here's the bitter irony. The system I had built worked so well, they didn't need me anymore. I had built myself out of a job. What I learned that day changed everything. Not just for me, but for 35 families who survived 2 revolutions because of it. And for my daughter, who at 12 years old asked me a question that made me realize I'd almost made the same mistake with her. This is that story. In the 90s, I was not thinking about retirement accounts or compounded interest. I was living on board the sailing vessel Dagmar Orn, part of an international expedition called Sea, Ice and Mountains. That ship was our means to explore the most remote areas of this world. One of our missions took us to the South Pacific, where I found myself 40 meters underwater, shining a light into the rusted hull of a legendary warship. The SMS Seeadler, in English, Sea Eagle. The ship of Count Felix von Lackner, the gentleman pirate, the last German pirate. During World War I, Lackner captured over a dozen Allied vessels. But here's what made him really legendary. He never killed a single person. He treated every prisoner with dignity and respect, and he won through cunning and not cruelty. The Sea Eagle eventually ran aground on the small island of Mopelia, uninhabited, in French Polynesia in 1917 and vanished into history. For decades, explorers searched for it. I was leading a small team that found it. That's who I was back then. A deep wreck exploration diver, not a recreational diver, an expedition diver. The kind who goes to places that don't exist on tourist maps. This was before Google Maps, definitely. Before GPS was in everyone's pocket, and we were working from charts that still had white marks. Unexplored, unmapped territory. What an adventure. The kind of places where if something went wrong, no one was coming for help. At 60 meters underwater, there's no room for panic. You calculate your decompression stops before you descend. You meticulously rehearse emergency protocols until they are absolutely automatic. Because when you're in the dark, running low on air, with no quick exit, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your systems. Those years shaped me in ways that boardrooms never could. They taught me resilience under pressure, clarity in uncertainty, and teamwork when failure is not an option. But here's what the ocean never taught me: how to stay afloat financially. I had stories that could fill a book. I had survival skills that most people will never need, but I had zero financial stability. And my bank account looked nothing like my resume. Eventually, all good things come to an end and the expedition stopped. I stepped off the Dagmar Orn and into the real business world. I traded my wetsuit for something more dry and became a manager. In '98, my boss then handed me kind of a dog-eared copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Great book. I read it in 2 days. It was the first crack in the glass. The book was all about the owner's mindset. It showed me that there were really 2 ways to play the game: working for money or making money work for you. And I realized I had been playing the wrong side my entire young life. But here's the thing, I was already serious. I wasn't slacking. For 5 years I had put everything into building systems that made my employer's business thrive. I optimized their operations. I solved problems they didn't even know that they had. I automated them processes. I created efficiencies that boosted their profits. I was a high performer. I thought I was building security. But then, one morning, a morning I will never really forget, I was called in an office and fired. Not for incompetence, not for poor performance. I was fired because I had made myself too expensive for their budget. And here's the bitter irony. I had built them a system so good that the company ran on autopilot. The operations I had spent 5 years perfecting, they no longer needed me. My own secretary, who had never worked as a manager before, could now run the whole show, the entire operation. Not because she wasn't capable, but because the system I had built was that good. I had effectively killed my own position by being too good at building systems for somebody else. Here I am. I stood outside that building with a cardboard box of my things, like in the movies, and I realized the game was rigged. If I didn't figure this out, I knew exactly what would happen. I spent the next 30 years jumping from job to job, building wealth for other people, and retire with nothing but stories and a pension that wouldn't cover the bills. I'd seen that future. I had watched it happen to men much, much smarter than me. And I believe in myself, so I refused to let it happen to my family. It didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter how much value I created. It didn't matter that I had literally led teams through life or death situations in the most extreme conditions on earth. It didn't even matter that I had built them a machine that printed money. In someone else's business, none of that mattered. I wasn't a partner, I was a line item, and line items can be deleted. I realized that resilience isn't enough if you don't own the system. It didn't matter how good I was. The steering wheel was in someone else's hands. The cruel lesson here, if you build great systems for someone else, you make yourself replaceable. On the other hand, if you build great systems for yourself, you become untouchable. That evening, I needed to get some serious steam out of my system. So I did what I always did when life got a bit heavy. I went to play squash. My regular opponent was a man named Magdi. He was actually my bank manager, but over the years he had become much more than that. A friend and a mentor. Magdi was 15 years or so older than me. On the squash court, he was an absolute beast. No matter how frustrated I was, he'd run me into the ground. After the game, drenched in sweat and finally able to speak again, I told him what had happened. The firing, the irony of building a system so good that I made myself expendable and so on. And Magdi carefully listened, and then he said something that changed everything. You need a margin of safety in your life, Morgan. Not just in stock portfolios, in everything. Income, asset, option. You need to build a buffer so wide that no one can ever delete you again. That conversation on the squash court became the foundation of everything I built next. That morning, I had made a vow. Nobody will ever fire me again. And that evening, Magdi showed me how. I built my new vehicle, the owner mindset. I stopped renting my time and started building assets. I stopped building systems for other people and started building them for myself. First, I built companies. I founded Dive Mix in Egypt, then Meinecke in the UAE, some other businesses on the way. Industrial businesses, real operations, things I owned. Second, I built a war chest. Liquidity that bought me the power to say no, the power to walk away from bad deals, the power to wait, just like Magdi had taught me, a margin of safety. Third, I built what I call the income shock absorber, multiple streams, investments, real estate, a system designed to survive chaos. In 2011, that system was tested in a way I never expected, and then tested again. I was running Dive Mix in Egypt when the first revolution hit. They called it the Arab Spring. One day, I was managing a growing business. Next day, there were tanks rolling through the country. Within 3 years, there would be 2 revolutions. Each one pressure testing my frameworks to the bone. The banks closed, not for a day, for weeks. ATMs ran dry, international wire transfers froze, supply chains collapsed overnight. No electricity, no benzene, no diesel, customers vanished, phones stopped ringing. I had 35 employees looking at me, saying, "Boss," 35 families depending on their paycheck. 35 people wondering if they'd have jobs next week or tomorrow. And at home, I had my own family to protect. My wife and a newborn baby, just 1 month old. Of all things, my parents had flown in from Germany to visit and were now trapped in the middle of a revolution. Most business owners in my position panicked. I saw a lot left and right. They laid off staff, they closed up shop, they waited for the storm to pass, hoped for the best. But I didn't panic because I had a system. My war chest bought me time to think clearly. But I knew cash reserves alone wouldn't be enough. not if this dragged on for months and years. I needed to restructure. I analyzed every part of the business and found the one chapter that was still profitable, even in this chaos, was maintenance. Essential services that my customers couldn't postpone, no matter what was happening in the street. I scaled the entire company down to that one profit center. Then I restructured so that everyone, every single employee, was working to support that remaining revenue stream. Then I did something that felt terrifying. I stepped in front of all 35 employees and told them the truth. Everyone is going to take a hit. There will be short-term pain, but the long-term gain is this. Nobody loses their job. We're going to go through this as a family together, and we're going to come out of that stronger. That's exactly what happened. I didn't just keep them employed. I helped them navigate this chaos. I sat with the employees and gave them financial advice on how to handle their own expenses in catastrophic times, how to stretch their money to the last bit, how to prioritize. Those 35 families didn't just keep their jobs. They learned. When I showed them how to build their own margin of safety, something shifted. They stopped panicking. They started planning. Families who had never talked about money before were suddenly having real conversations at their kitchen tables. Some opened their first saving accounts when the banks opened again. Others paid off debts they had been carrying for years. We survived this together. When stability finally returned, we scaled back up stronger than ever before. And those families, they weren't just employed. They were financially stronger than ever before, and definitely before the revolution. Not a single one of my 35 employees lost their job during the two revolutions. That's when I understood what the owner mindset really meant. It wasn't just about making money. It was about building a system that could survive anything, even tanks in the street twice. Today, I have a 7-figure portfolio and multiple successful exits. And I don't say that to brag, but the real transformation wasn't the money. The real transformation, I moved from the anxiety of being deletable to the calm of being an owner, and I sleep well at night. I thought the story ended there. I had built my system, I had proven it to work, I was set, right? But there was a problem I didn't see coming. Yes, I watched my daughter, Noor, spend her pocket money the moment it hit her hand. Literally. She'd get her pocket money on Friday. By Saturday, gone. Sweets, makeup, random things she would forget about by Monday. No thought, no plan, just gone. My first instinct was to lecture, to sit her down, explain compound interest and the importance of delayed gratification, to share the wisdom I had spent 20 years accumulating. But then I remembered myself at her age, and how many lectures had I ignored? How many times had my parents tried to teach me about money, only for it to go in here and out there? I didn't start learning until I was fired, until I had no choice. Did I really want Noor to wait until she hit her own wall? I realized that giving Noor advice wouldn't work. I wasn't raising a student. I was raising a future line item, unless I did something different. She didn't need a lecture. She needed a system, the same kind of system that had saved me and saved my employees when everything fell apart. But here's what I didn't expect. I couldn't just hand her my system. She wasn't going to read investment books at 12. She wasn't going to care about war chests and income shock absorbers. I had to build it with her. She had to see how I handled money. She had to ask questions. She had to make decisions with me, not for me. Financial education doesn't work when it's taught from parent to child. It only works when it's built together. Shared language, shared system, shared habits. That's when I created the Money Map method. A system designed for families to learn together. We started simple. I sat down with Noor at the kitchen table with 3 envelopes. Okay, I said, this is your income, your allowance. Let's call it your paycheck. Now we're going to divide it into 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, essentials, roughly 50%. The things you have to pay for. School supplies, transportation, non-negotiables. Bucket 2, comforts, 30%. The fun stuff, sweets, makeup, going out with friends, whatever you want. But you only buy it from this envelope. Bucket 3, future you. 20%. This one you don't touch. This is the money that future Noor will thank you for. Simple enough for a 12-year-old, powerful enough for a CEO. The same framework I used, just translated into her language. I didn't lecture her about saving. She decided how to allocate her money. She owned the decisions. I was just a guide. And then something shifted. She stopped spending blindly. She started asking questions. She'd come home and say, "Papa," that's how she calls me, I wanted to buy this thing, but I would have emptied my whole comforts envelope for the whole month. So I waited. After a few months, she came to me with another question I'll never forget. "Papa, what do I do with the money I'm saving? It's just sitting there." She wasn't just following instructions anymore, right? She was thinking like an owner. She had made that shift. That's when I knew this wasn't just about Noor. You don't need to dive shipwrecks to learn this. You don't need to be fired to wake up. You don't need to survive a revolution to build a system that works. You just need to stop building systems for someone else and start building them for your own family. Because in someone else's system, you're a line item and line items can be deleted. But smart money families, they write their own ledger and they're just one habit away. Subscribe and follow me every Saturday for more on building wealth habits, invest wisely, and think like owners.